Hi, comrades and relatives. Welcome back to the Red Nation podcast. Thank you so much to our patrons who allow us to keep doing this work and all of those who have sent donations that allow us to keep this podcast going and allow the Red Nation to continue doing its on the ground work. Again, your patronage means everything. And if you haven't yet, I would encourage you to consider becoming a patron. Our subscriptions start at just $2, so give it some thought. Today we have a very special guest. I'm so excited to be talking with Sardana. She is indigenous from the Sakha Republic in so-called Russia. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me to promote this study that came out on February 14th, titled Indigenous Diamonds. My name is Sardana Nikolaeva, and I'm Sakha from the Sakha Republic, which is the far northeastern region of the Russian Federation. And Sakha Republic is known by its large territory, which is the largest, territorially speaking, in size among the all the administrative units within the Russian Federation. And also the 40% of our territory is located in the Arctic area. So we are the Arctic region. And this is like one of the things that not so many people know is that Russia actually has the largest Arctic territory in comparison with the other Arctic spaces, like United States, Canada, Norway, European Arctic, and such. It is also known by the fact that it's very sparsely populated, so predominantly indigenous peoples live there. We Sakha people, we are the largest in population. We're around like 500,000 people, but we also have the other small numbered, which is the the very official categorization of indigenous peoples within Russia, the small numbered indigenous peoples, among them Evenki, Evene, Yukagir, Chukchi, and Dolgani. And we all reside within the Sakha Republic. And also, we known by the fact that 90% of the Russian diamonds, or the diamonds that are mined within the Russian Federation, they come from my home region, from Sakha Republic. And this 90% of diamond mining production accounts for around 27% of the global diamond mining production.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very big. It's actually the largest. This is something that I learned recently when I was looking at just wondering, what the companies exist within Canada.
Yeah.
And apparently Canada is the third largest diamond producer, and the second one is Botswana. But Botswana is the company De Beers, which is Belgian and British, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, infamous.
Yes, it is. It is. And I actually talked about that, this very historicized perspective on the relationship between De Beers and the diamond mining production in my home region. It's like there is a very, very long history of this relationship.
Thank you for that introduction. When I first read your report, I just realized how very ignorant I was to this topic. Like, this is the most comprehensive thing I've seen about diamond production and extraction on indigenous lands. This is in a region that I wasn't very familiar with. And so today in the show, we're going to be talking a lot about your recent report that you put out titled Indigenous Diamonds, Your Special Study. Our comrade and my co-host, Nick Estes, blurbed it. I wanted to read his little blurb real quick. It says, Indigenous Diamonds is a critical, historical, and ethnographic study of diamond extraction in the Sakha region. Dr. Nikolaeva Nikolaeva
Oh, that's
makes
okay. That's okay.
no worries, makes several important interventions and brings new information about diamond mining and production, indigenous peoples in the global diamond trade. This is an important and well-researched study that will resonate beyond academic circles. You joined Nick in an episode that I wasn't a part of a little while back. In that episode, can you kind of maybe catch up our listeners who maybe didn't get a chance to listen to that one?
What I remember, yes, what I remember, we talked about generally about my home region and the mainly focusing on the category of indigeneity and of how the indigenous peoples are recognized as indigenous, talking about the politics of recognition within the Russian Federation. And it is, I believe that it's an important conversation to have, like, because, for example, we Saha people were not necessarily recognized as indigenous by the Russian federal government, which I believe is very problematic because, but at the same time, like, as any nation state, Russian Federation, it has own way of recognizing indigeneity, and we're not recognized as indigenous only because of our population size. It was like too many of you, too many of you. That's why you're not indigenous. So this is
Wow.
it's actually quite interesting because the cap, right, like the numeric cap for being recognized as indigenous in Russia is 50,000 people, which
My
is,
God.
yeah, which is kind of like eliminates so many groups that are indigenous to their territories and to their regions, but they're not, because of that, they are not recognized as indigenous people. But at the same time, like in my understanding, my indigeneity is builds on necessarily builds on our relationship with other indigenous peoples and the other indigenous communities, and specifically talking about the that I mentioned, the small numbered indigenous peoples who are legally recognized as indigenous within the Russian Federation. So I think we talked about that, and like generally the history of indigenous politics, and the state politics towards indigenous peoples and the communities within different historical periods, like looking at the Imperial Russia, Soviet Union, and the post-Soviet Russia. And I also briefly talk about that in my study as well, because it's kind of like one of the important contexts to understanding, at least how I see that, understanding of diamond mining production and the processes of indigenizing the diamonds that I
Hmm.
critique in my study.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, just what I got to read. I didn't get to read the entire thing, unfortunately. Um, but you mentioned that you say the post-Soviet neoliberal state that came to
Mhm.
power just did a really poor job of implementing indigenous rights, which I'm assuming has a lot to do with the recognition as well. How that has complicated the power that you have to protect your lands, right? Or the way you're able to benefit economically from extraction done on your lands.
Mhm.
I just was wondering if you kind of talk about that because it's so rare that we get to hear an indigenous perspective on the post-Soviet moment and how that impacted you, and that's something that I'm
Mhm.
interested in having our listeners hear.
Mhm. Mhm. I completely agree with that. Like I was looking for what I was thinking about writing of the experiences of my community, like, and the experiences of other indigenous communities, not only in this study, but also in my dissertation study. I found that there's a very limited literature about indigenous experiences during the transition period. Like first of all, most importantly, like during the 1990s, this transition to the neoliberal free market economy system. And secondly, most of the studies that I could find in English and in Russian, they were written by either by the white Western, like predominantly male
Mm.
anthropologists,
Ah.
and and other, and other school. And I'm saying that as like I'm trained anthropologist, so but like I'll be the first to diss anthropology because I know where it's coming from. And secondly, a lot of the Russian scholars they write about my home region because it's, I would say that most of them they see my home region and all the indigenous people who reside within Sakha Republic as the last exotic people that are left
Mm.
within the more modernized like neoliberalized Russia. So
Mm-hmm.
and it's again it's like it's specifically that discourse like that
Mm-hmm.
narrative is recreated in how the diamond mining company how it utilizes the images and the like these narratives about local indigenous communities in order to market the diamonds that come from the indigenous territories. So this is the process of the indigenization that I talk about in my study.
Wow, that is fascinating. So you're kind of like suggesting that that post-Soviet moment when the neoliberal economy is rising really impacted how indigenous identity was created or portrayed in an effort to bolster the diamond industry.
Yes, I would say so, at least within the context of my home region, because I can say a lot about the indigenous experiences in other areas because I don't have that information. However, this is something that I could argue, like based on the experiences of my community, specifically, like my family, myself, because my home village was the hub of the diamond mining industry since the 1950s.
Yeah.
And it's still very much going on, and it
Yeah.
actually intensified since 1990s. But there is a fundamental difference, like when we speak about the diamond mining in my home region in Russia, but also in other geographies. So what is the fundamental difference is that we had the history of the Soviet Union,
Mm-hmm.
like because this the whole mining operation it wasn't necessarily private, right? Like it was the
Yeah.
part of the national economy, and it was in a sense distributing all the wealth that was coming from the diamond mining production, like to everyone who lived within the Soviet Union. So this like difference in understanding. And everything changed in 1990s, as I talk
Mm-hmm.
about that in the study, when the new Sakha government, the post-Soviet Sakha government, they tried to, in a sense, create this nationalized diamond production. But it was it was different from the Soviet nation. Now it was more focused on the local indigenous Sakha nation. And this is the 90, that's why the 1990s, like this transition period was very important for the local communities. And because I talk about in the study how a lot of people they got involved in the diamond mining industry, and local Saha people, and other indigenous peoples, because before that it was predominated by the or dominated by the white settlers, like who worked for the industry. So most of these migrant workers, white settlers, they came from Central Soviet Union region, also from Ukraine, from Belarusia, like from all over, and they settled close to the areas where the diamond mining was happening, like, and a lot of them in my home village. And then, however, it drastically changed in the 1990s when a lot of white people they kind of left because there is no anything else, like to profit from at the time, because during the Soviet Union, the diamond industry was extremely important for the national economy. And that's why the people who worked within the diamond industry, during the Soviet times, they were receiving all the different perks and the privileges. In most of the cases, it was like financial benefits and things like that. So, and all of that, of course, was disappeared, right? Like disappeared after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that's why a lot of people, I think it's like maybe like 60% or something, the people who relocated specifically to work in the diamond mining industry during the Soviet period, they just left. They just left because they didn't see any again no benefits, right? Like no benefits are coming, but like local people, we can't leave. We couldn't leave because this is our territories, this is our lands, and that's why, and because of the whole collapse of the economy, the economic crisis of the 1990s, the only industry that came to be somehow surviving in the 1990s in my home region was the diamond mining industry. It was still lucrative. It still created some employment opportunities, but now it was employment opportunities for the local people. And that's why, like a lot of people, and I remember like we actually had this in my home village. They built in 1990s, they built this very big, very large building, which was supposed to become a diamond polishing and cutting factory, and it was actually the largest building in my village at that time. But yes, because it was the ambition, right? Like it was our national ambition to teach local people the skills that they had been taught before, that they have been practiced before. So now the diamonds became extremely important for the national identity of Sakha people and of the Sakha Republic, because now people could use their like very specific local skills in order to create the commodity which was going overseas, like which was accessible mostly to the Western consumers. And this is also became the problem in my understanding, because when you think about the like the consumption part of the whole diamond mining industry in my home region, is that local people, they don't have money to buy diamonds. We don't have money to buy diamonds. Like I've never seen one actually myself, and I think it's saying a lot, because I do come right like from the area which since 1950s, like I can't even imagine how many diamonds they got from our district. But so the local people, a lot of the local people, they haven't even seen the diamonds, like actually, or they have never touched the diamonds. Uh,
Wow.
yeah. So I would say like more than 90% of all the diamonds, they go to the Western consumers. It goes to it used to go to the United States, to the European consumers. There is also a market in Middle East, and there is also apparently growing Asian market for the diamonds mined in Russia. So, and it creates this question that we, within the lab that I'm a postdoctoral fellow, that I completely forgot to mention in the beginning. I'm a postdoctoral fellow with Zibing Lab at the University of Toronto. And last year, when we were thinking about how to create a study, like what kind of study to focus on for my postdoctoral fellowship, and my previous work was about diamond mining, but it wasn't necessarily focusing on the specifically that part, like on the part of the consumption. It was mostly looking at the environmental impact of the diamond mining production in one of the indigenous territories in the Arctic, area in my home region. We started thinking about that. I started thinking about that, and one of this is a simple question, right? Like to ask, where are all these diamonds going? Like who is buying all of these diamonds? But it's very curious that in where I'm from, like no one asks that question. No one has ever asked that
Mm.
question. Like we have a lot of conversations, we have a lot of conversations, critical discourses, academic and non-academic, like very public discussions about impact of the diamond mining industry, like on the impact on the environmentally speaking,
Mm-hmm.
culturally speaking, impact on the political aspect and the economy, local economy, and everything. So they exist all of these discussions. However, surprisingly, no one asked that question.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I also like myself, like I also have never thought about that. Like where or who is buying all of these diamonds? And this is the another part, like another side of the capitalist production, right? Like so you produce, and then there's like cluster of people who consume. So, so we talk a lot about the production and the problematics of diamond production in my home region. However, we don't necessarily critique the another side. Like who are the consumers? Who is perpetuating the extremely harmful, like environmentally, economically, politically, and culturally, um, the this capitalist extractivism or extractive capitalism. I like all of these production. So we decided to ask that very simple question about the consumers where the diamonds go from my home region. And again, it's more than 90% of all the diamonds that go outside Russia. And also, there is also a very interesting fact that in relation to sanctions, like if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. I'm very interested in this conversation because, right, like you have to some extent the opportunity to bolster your local government and to provide employment, but it's always there's always the flip side to that.
Mhm.
And please get into that because it's very interesting.
Yeah, and in my study, yes, thank you. And in my study, I actually finished with the sanctions. So the study primarily focuses on the Alrosa. Alrosa is the world's largest diamond mining company. They actually originate from my home region. And there is a very interesting fact about who owns the company. Because since February 2022, the company has been sanctioned by the United States and by the European Commission, by the European Union, by Canada. I think I mentioned the United States, right? Like by the United States, and I think maybe like Australia, the part of that, and for some reason the Bahamas. Like I don't know what's happening there, but but
Weird.
yes, I don't know what's happening there. However, so they are also sanctioned. The company is also sanctioned by the United Nations and the World Bank, and
Wow.
so so this is very global sanctioning thing that is going on. So
And
anyway,
it's oh,
uh-huh.
sorry, go ahead. I was and this is like, and their target is Russia, but it's you all paying the consequences
Yes,
for.
exactly, and this is the why I decided to finish, to conclude my conversation, specifically talking about the sanctions. So the all of these sanctions they claim to target the government of Russia, Putin, and I use one of the articles that has been published in 2022, I think in Europe. So they refer to diamonds that come from my home region as Putin's diamonds. And they
Wow.
claim, yeah, and they claim that they are sanctioning the company because of they believe that it provides what is it, the revenues they are intended for continuing the conflict, like for
Hmm.
feeding the conflict or whatever. However, a lot of people, I think it's like, like intentionally forget, or they don't necessarily, or they are not necessarily interested in doing some kind of research, like the background research. On the company is that the company actually it's an open joint stock company. Meaning that the shares are public.
Yeah.
Like so anyone, literally anyone can buy the shares of this company. So according to the statistical data, like recent statistical data, and I included this important information in my study as well. So the 33%, it does belong to, or shares do belong to the government of the Russian Federation, like to the federal government. However, another 33%, they belong to my home region, to Sakha Republic. And for the revenues coming out from sales of diamonds, up to 42, 45% or 47%, they're put into the regional budget. So we have, like almost 50% dependence of the regional budget on the diamond revenues. And it's a huge number. And and also like each district where they do the diamond production, including my home district, we get 1% of revenues. So, and it's huge. It's a huge amount for the local people, and it's also really important to kind of like talk about how our local government and also the district themselves, how they spend this money. And it's really important because most of the money they use to develop infrastructure and also to support educational development and also cultural development of the local communities. They also support older people. And and also like remember like all of these territories, like all of these districts, they also the dominant population are indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
So we're talking also like very important context of these 33% of shares, but also in addition to that, like so we have the 33% federal government, 33% my home region, so we have 66. And what about the rest? Again, remember that this is the public open joint stock company. So apparently, and I found this information very intriguing, is that so the 33, almost 34% of all of these shares, they call them public floating, so open floating, like so anyone can buy them. So they belong to individuals and also different institutions and the organizations. So out of all of these, like open floating shares, 33%, they belong to the citizens of the United States.
Wow. Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Like, who are the shareholders and where are they from? Well, there we go.
So 33%, they are citizens or the like institutions in the United States. 25% is like around 25%. Europe and UK. Only 14% of shares out of this, like 34%, they belong to individuals and the institutions within Russia itself. And also apparently 11% they belong to people in Middle East. I don't necessarily know, like what countries, because they don't provide this kind of information. And the rest in other countries, I'm guessing, like maybe the Asian countries, like the probably China. But it's a very very small percentage in comparison to the United States and the European shareholding. And I believe that it begs a question. So okay, so you are saying that begs the question about the Putin's diamonds. Right? Like first of all, these are not Putin's diamonds; they actually come from indigenous region. And secondly, some part of it actually belongs to the foreigners, like to the people who reside within the Western countries. And in
Hmm.
addition to that, again, as I have mentioned, more than 90%, the consumers, they are come from the Western countries, from the United States, Canada, and Europe. So I think people need to think about this very hard, like before thinking about how to sanction more. But they still sanctioned, and the as you know, Russia now is the most sanctioned country in the world, and it includes the sanctions against the this diamond mining company. But recently, I saw some local
Hmm.
newspapers, regional newspapers. They kind of like started publishing like small articles about how the sanctions are affecting local indigenous peoples. And like there are a couple of very upsetting things that happened. So the first one is the company, because of the sanctions, they are refusing to provide their share of the revenues to the regional budget. And as I remember, the local indigenous communities, specifically in the rural Arctic spaces, they actually depend on them.
Yeah.
So what is happening is that a lot of the projects that this district, including my own district, were planning to develop, like for example, mostly development of infrastructure, like building school, like building kindergarten or
Yeah.
building, like cultural center, like all of this. Apparently, a lot of these projects that were waiting for their share of the original budget to come in, now they're frozen
Hmm. My
because
God.
yeah, because the company is like, like we're sanctioned, we don't have enough money to give you, and this is I believe this is already the second year
Yeah.
that they are saying that, like, and they're not necessarily providing their share of the revenues. And the secondly is since January, when the European Union, they directly sanctioned the company, because before that they actually refusing to do that. But
Yeah.
they're not necessarily thinking about the indigenous peoples, like in my home
Hmm.
region. They're more thinking about the employees in the Antwerp, in
Oh,
Belgium,
yeah.
the employees of the diamond, like marketing, whatever, like companies that exist in Belgium. So they're kind of like, like saying that, or there are a lot of people employed, like by these, by De Beers, for example, like, and we depend on the diamonds coming from Russia, like, and more than 10,000 people, we have employees, and, like, we all depend on that. So we're not going to sanction it for now, but they did
Hmm.
sanction from January 1st this year.
Hmm.
And what happened is, so company decided that, okay, so they had this conversation that, okay, so we're sanctioned, like the market in Europe, in the United States, like generally in the West, is very limited now, because of the sanctions. And what we're going to do, we're going to diversify
Hmm.
their
Okay.
production. So now they're going to focus not only on diamonds, but they're going to mine gold. They're also thinking about oil. They're also thinking
Ooh.
about the other mineral resources, and most of them more likely going to happen again on the indigenous territories.
Yeah.
So this is the another very sad impact and the effect of the sanctions, that people think that they, when they sanction the whatever rogue
Yeah.
country, they punish the governments and the leaders of these governments, but they are punishing uh,
The
the
people.
most marginalized, the most marginalized people within these nation states, within these countries. And it just happened that within Russia, when we speak about the sanctions toward Alrosa, the diamond mining company, the people who are going to be the most suffering are the indigenous people.
Mm-hmm. My God. And this, I mean, this reminds me of many instances, including here, like in New Mexico, when it comes to the selling of
Mhm.
oil and uranium ore. It also reminds me of like the what's happening in Venezuela, where they
Mhm.
also have
Mhm.
sanctions on their oil,
Right.
and it's the indigenous people who are impacted the most. Um, and I, it really gets me back to this question that I had crafted, and I've kind of thought about it more while we've been talking. You know, it's very clear. Or also, before I set up this question, I had a quick like jurisdictional question. So the Sakha Republic, it's not recognized as a native nation, but it is a native majority, and it is indigenous people who are populating the districts and running the local
Mhm.
government, right?
Yes.
So in that way, would you say that, you know, thinking about a future like where you can assert sovereignty, would it make sense to consider that a native nation on its own, right? Like when it like because it's essentially it's the jurisdictional rules and the legal rules of the occupiers that strip us of our nationhood, that strip us of our sovereignty. And so the question I set up references here. You said that revenues from the diamond industry account for 42% of the Saha Republic's annual
Mhm.
budget. Here in New Mexico, almost half of New Mexico's revenue comes from tribal
Mhm.
gaming and oil extraction from native lands. And so it sounds to me like, I mean, at least compared to where tribes are at here, you have a little bit more of a grip economically on how you're able to directly take in the revenue and create infrastructure and, you know, build your communities. And we don't necessarily have that, but I think that that dynamic shows that our occupiers, right, whether it's the United States or Russia, they are dependent on us and our lands and the extraction that takes place on our lands in a way that I believe could be wielded to assert our sovereignty in more concrete ways. And it's a totally different, like, you know, I'm making the comparison, but it's obviously very different of what's happening there. It sounds like you
Mhm.
all are in a position already to begin creating those alternatives. So I'm just wondering, like, what do you see coming in the future in terms of strengthening your people, you know, regaining that autonomy
Mhm.
to support your people and not having to worry about, you know, getting caught up in the political milieu and suffering from sanctions, right?
Mhm.
Just kind of like thinking about how you're envisioning a future. And I know that's a loaded question, so like
It is a very loaded question because it's the context is very different. And I remember we talked about this with Nick last time, that the like, and how we understand the sovereignty are also very different, right? Like, and also, however, I would say that I completely agree with that, because this is a very unique context for any kind of extractive activities, and generally, and specifically the diamond mining, right? Like diamond mining production as an industry, yeah, globally speaking. Because I remember that I had conversations with some of my friends from Latin America, and what I told them, that we actually own 33% of shares as like as a republic, they're very much surprised, because it's like how this has happened. How this has happened, because like, for example, in Peru, right? Like in Peru, there are so many transnational companies and corporations, mining companies and corporations, and they don't necessarily belong to the local people and to the local governments. They belong to the West. You know, like, to, for example, I think that there are more than 70 mining companies in Peru alone, from Canada. And when I think about Peru,
yeah.
it's like, it's such a small country. Like, territorially, like, we're much bigger. However, like, when I think about, like, it's so obscene in a sense. Like how
Yeah.
all of all of this, like revenues and the benefits, like local people apparently they don't get anything. So for me, it was very strange, I guess, to hear that. So that's why the context is very different. And the
Absolutely. That's probably the
and
most striking
uh,
thing you
yeah.
told me is how much revenue you get. Like, we
Yeah.
don't, I mean, so one of the biggest oil producing nations here, the Navajo Nation, people still don't have electricity or running water.
Mm, yeah.
Like,
And it's like, and I really want to emphasize, like how the local people, they actually use these revenues. Like for
hmm
example, when I was doing my dissertation research in three indigenous villages
hmm
in the Arctic region, so I learned that with the revenues from the diamond mining, what they did, they actually provided heating system to all the buildings within three villages.
Hmm.
And it's a very difficult thing to do because
Right.
it's Arctic. It's Arctic. And apparently it's actually free because, like the
Mm.
local government, the local administration, they understood that it's Arctic, like it's very cold, like extremely harsh conditions,
Yeah.
climate conditions, like, and that's why heat is something that essentially a human right, like Arctic human right, Arctic human right. So, and they need to have the heat, like available to all the buildings. And
hmm
considering that there is a high proportion of the older population, of
Yeah.
the elders within the community, like everyone was telling me that, like this was the best investment that they did. And in addition
Nice.
to that, there's the heating complex, like the how the whole heating happens. And the people who are telling me that actually employment in that heating complex was the most stable employment that anyone could get.
Nice.
Yeah, because they need the heat like all the time, right? So,
Yeah.
and I was amazed by that. And like it's a bit different in my district, but this is what the community, they decided that it's important to have, and this is how they invested, and this is how they use their portion of the revenues from the shares that they get. But I forget what we're talking about. Oh yeah. So, and because of that, it's I think like, especially within the context of Sahara Republic, it's a bit difficult to talk about the sovereignty because of the our historical experiences, and also how the local people, they understand the sovereignty.
hmm
Because in the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, every republic had the right to become independent from the post-Soviet Russia.
hmm
And for example, Belarusia, they became independent.
hmm
Ukraine, they also became independent.
hmm
But our leadership at the time, they decided against it. So because of the all this very long historical relationship that existed, but I'm also thinking, I was actually thinking about that, is that there is this fundamental, very critical understanding of what would happen if we become independent,
Yeah.
like if we become sovereign. And especially within the context of the natural resources, because my home region is the richest in the mineral natural resources
hmm
within the Russian Federation. So not only the territory, but also, like the different kinds of natural resources.
Yeah.
Um, so, and I think like at the time, like our leaders, they thought about, like the, what could happen, like if we had become independent.
Yeah.
And I remember like people actually talking about that, like immediately I imagined that we could have been, in a sense, captured by the Americans.
Okay.
And like, and knowing the history,
Yeah.
of, and you know that better like than anyone else, like of the what kind of politics the the American government it has towards its own indigenous people, its own
Yeah.
native people. They wouldn't have cared at all, like about some people in the Arctic region in what
Mm-hmm.
previously was, like Soviet Union. So,
Yeah.
and the same would have happened very much if, again, like if we were captured, like by other imperial powers and such. So, and I
Yeah.
think that's why, like our leadership at the time, they thought about like our population was very small. Small. We don't have our own military.
Mm-hmm.
We Our economy is very much interconnected and intersected with the central Russian economy.
Yeah.
So I think they kind of like made this logical conclusion that like maybe we can work, like continue working with the central Russia and the federal government, but on more equal footing,
Yeah.
which actually happened.
Good.
However, it changed a bit slightly because of the intensification of the neoliberal politics and its
Mm.
effects on the federal politics and the regional politics as well. But I think that it's a very different conversation to have. But again, like
Absolutely.
and again, like I completely understand, like the decision of the then government, like that we had at the time in the 1990s.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it makes me think about the really horrible things that happen in former Soviet territories that got independence when Western
Mm.
countries started meddling in their
Oh yeah.
politics and propping up puppet governments and just how horrible it was. Like, so yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. And thank you for
Hmm.
providing that context.
And I actually believe that the fact that we have 33% now
Mm-hmm.
of the diamond mining revenues, it's actually it's not even what I believe, it's a fact, right? Like of the negotiations that were happening at that time
Mm-hmm.
in the 1990s. And again, like because the people had much more critical understanding. But also, we need to remember that Russia is now it's a very much neoliberal capitalist country, but it still has, in a sense, like baby capitalism, right? Because we
Yeah.
have been capitalists only for like 30 years or
Mm-hmm.
20 years, so it's not that long.
Yeah.
So we still have, like the social services available, like and the medical services, health services, like free education, like somehow free education for the local people, like
Mm-hmm.
development of cultural projects, and etc., etc. But this is actually quite funny because a lot of the children who were born after 1990s, they don't understand that all of these like the availabilities, like the that we have, they actually the legacy of the Soviet Union, but they grew up during the kind of like intense anti-Soviet, anti-communist
Mm.
times in Russia in 1990s. So I
Yeah.
think they kind of like don't have this understanding of that, but also feel like we kind of like pivot in a very different way. But
Yeah.
yes, I agree. The contexts are very different, and how we see ourselves as, I guess, like for now aspiring. But also, like I will also add that I've seen a lot of the tweets, whatever, like and the people in the West talking about my home region. So the
Hmm.
first, firstly, when I talk about my home region, they say it's a prison. Okay.
Oh yeah, no, that's common discourse, and it's like just because you couldn't handle it.
Yes. So, and the secondly, they also started talking about my home region because because apparently they want to decolonize Russia, and in their extremely simplistic and rudimentary understanding of decolonization is just taking Russia apart, right?
Yeah,
And
ridiculous.
yes, and so I find it also very baffling, like to me, that they talk about like my people, right, without
Hmm.
even understanding history, not understanding the context, not even thinking about what local people think, like about
Hmm.
all of this. So and like based on that, I want to make a note that this study, it is critical, like it is critical of the diamond mining industry, but it's a very complex critique, like, and it's a very complex narrative about diamond mining in
Yeah.
the home region, like in all of the cultural politics, like in the economic politics and generally indigenous politics, which are involved in that. It's much more complex and sophisticated than
Yes.
just simply Russia bad,
Yes, and
which is yeah.
it must be sophisticated because, and that's why I appreciate you keep reminding us this is a global issue and we're talking about
Mhm.
a global market, right? You can't put the onus on a singular country. But yeah, I appreciate
Mhm.
you parsing out all the nuance of this.
Oh yeah, and why I'm saying that is because I noticed that some people and some organizations that promote the liberal politics, Western liberal politics, they kind of like latched on my study. And
Mm,
they're using it only because of the title. Like it is a striking title. I agree. It's Indigenous Diamonds, Extractivism, and Indigenous Politics in the Diamond Province of Russia. Like I love this title, but clearly they haven't read what this study is all about because again my analysis is much more complex than
mm-hmm,
again like simply saying like look, like Russia is oppressing its indigenous peoples, because we have our own investment in the diamond mining industry,
mm-hmm,
despite the fact, like that our relationship with the diamond mining industry is very complicated, is
mm-hmm,
because again it has been going on since 1950s, and it
mm-hmm,
affected how we see ourselves, like as a nation, how we see ourselves as indigenous people, not only globally but also locally, and all of this in the study. But I was very annoyed by the fact that without even reading, some people are just using it for their own goals, some political goals, and some benefits, I guess, that come out of it. And I'm very much against it because this is my study.
mm-hmm,
And I can't, I guess, like, I can't, like, control, like, who's going to use it. However, I want to make a note that I wrote this study specifically for my people.
mm-hmm,
And I wrote
mm-hmm,
this study for other indigenous peoples.
mm-hmm,
Because ultimately, what I want, like the ultimate goal, result, what I want to have from this study is creating and building solidarity with other indigenous peoples and the communities in the global north and also in the global south. But I'm
mm-hmm,
also thinking like because one of the things that a lot of people don't think about is that the sanctions on this specifically diamond mining company in my home region, it's also going to affect the indigenous communities in other places,
mm-hmm,
because now after January this year, because of the sanctions, this huge niche within the global diamond market is going to be open,
mm,
because Russia was providing 25 or more than 25% of the global diamonds,
yeah,
which again coming from my home region, and this is huge amount of revenues. But
Hmm.
now, when the company is no longer, like the global market is no longer available for Alrosa, for diamond mining company, what is going to happen is this market niche is not going to be empty. Someone is going to fill it, and someone is
Yeah.
going to fill it. Like, I'm thinking Canada, because Canada is the third largest diamond producer in the world.
Hmm.
And guess where the diamonds are mined within Canada?
The Arctic, or the
Yes,
same plate.
it's in the Northwestern Territories. It's the Northwestern Territories, which are indigenous territories.
Yeah, I just learned about that recently too. I actually learned about some protests that were taking place as far
Mm,
back as the early 2000s, where
mhm, mhm.
elders were leading big protests against the diamond industry because all the young people were working in the mines
Mhm,
and
mhm.
their health was suffering. They were
Yeah,
committing suicide or becoming
yeah,
addicts. And I just learned about that like last month.
yeah. So this niche is not going to stay empty, and it's going to be the Canadian government. And this is my prediction: Canadian
Hmm.
government is going to invest in more diamond production,
Mm,
specifically in the Northwestern Territories, and also a little bit in Nunavut as well. And guess who is going
yeah.
to suffer now? The indigenous communities here are going to suffer now. The sanctions are not only affecting my people and other indigenous communities in my home region, but they're going to affect other indigenous communities in other places as well. But this is again, like people don't necessarily think about these kind of consequences, specifically, like the big governments.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I really appreciate you grounding your study and looking at class, right? Putting encouraging us to look at the consumers, right? Instead
Mhm,
of
mhm.
criticizing the people who are producing or selling their resources. You were talking about that very like basic understanding of decolonization. And sadly, I not only do I see a lot of non-natives in the U.S. Subscribe to that, I see a lot of Native people themselves subscribe to that, where they're going as far as being like, we need to tear down the telephone wires and we need to get rid of all of the oil infrastructure. And it's like, okay, well, we don't even have infrastructure in some places. Like I said, we don't even have running water or electricity in some places.
Mhm,
And so
mhm,
the very sophisticated and nuanced critique that your study provides is one that I think Native people in the US desperately need. I think Native people, so that we can be in better solidarity with Native
mhm,
people in the global South and all over the world, instead of,
mhm,
um, you know, I guess that's why I was kind of interested in those conversations about
mhm,
sovereignty, even though that might not be the right term in this case. But I also really appreciate that you're emphasizing that, you know, your study is not something for imperialists to take
mhm,
up and use for their own political agenda. I'm sure people look at it and assume that it's just a critique of Russia, but you're actually criticizing the powers that led to the fall of the Soviet Union and Russia's current state in the first place, right?
mhm,
Like,
mhm. Yeah.
um,
And also, I think like the discussion in the last chapter, which is titled "Indigenous Diamonds," like the whole thing that why I wrote the study about the process of indigenization of diamonds that we talked about in the beginning,
mhm,
how the company now is producing, like these narratives about indigenous peoples as traditional, like authentically indigenous, very archaic in a sense, like primitive, like, and
mhm,
how they live somewhere, like in their own bubble, like of the past or something like that, like so. And it's really important because why they do that, like at least the narratives that I found is it sounded, or I interpreted them as um, they're using the narratives in order to not only to position themselves as the company that supports and helps local indigenous communities, you know, like as all the extractive company they do. I think they
Yeah.
call it like social corporate responsibility,
Oh,
right? Like
wow.
that's so it's like corporate social responsibility. Yeah, I think that there's this
Okay.
kind of like horrid term, that
Okay.
horrifying term that they usually use. You know, like we're helping the local communities, marginalized communities. You know, like usually the indigenous communities. It also creates these the conditions for the indigenous people, local indigenous people, kind of like play to these stereotypes, you know, like and these
Mm-hmm.
to these archaic traditional images that they still
Mm-hmm.
very much use. And in how I see that, it's very problematic, right? Like not
Mm-hmm.
only it creates this false imagery
Mm-hmm.
and representation of the indigenous peoples and the indigenous realities in my home region,
Mm-hmm.
but also secondly is because this is specifically used to increase the price, you know, to um, increase the value, the economic value of the diamonds,
Mm-hmm.
because you know, like the company can claim, and they did claim, you know, like that, or you know, like we have mined these diamonds from the indigenous territories, we're employing indigenous local indigenous peoples, we're helping
Mm-hmm.
them with the development of the cultural projects and such, and therefore you know, like the value of the diamonds that are extracted there, they have to increase because of these kind of diamonds are rare, you know, these kind of diamonds are scarce. You can't
Mm-hmm.
find these kind of diamonds anywhere else
Mm-hmm.
because they are indigenous diamonds.
Yeah.
And this is why, I called I use, like, I call all of this, I name this, the whole process as a process of indigenization that is used by this specific extractive company. But also, I have a feeling that, you know, like, I think that what I have seen in literature um, about these kind of commodities, you know, like which are extracted, and natural resources which are extracted from the indigenous territories
Mm-hmm.
by the transnational and the local corporations and companies, you know, like this trend is can reproduce itself,
Mm-hmm.
but within a different context, in
Yeah.
a different geography. So because it is enticing, right? Like it is enticing for the consumers when I think about that. That,
Yeah.
oh, right, because it's the indigeneity is very scarce. It's
Mm-hmm.
rare. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because like, and people have this. It's very exotic in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and this understanding of indigeneity, it transferred on the commodities, but
Yeah.
but not necessarily in order to create the cultural value, right, for the local people, but to create the economic value, which
Yeah.
is in itself becomes the problem, because
Mm-hmm.
again, when I think about who is getting, you know, like the benefits out all of these processes.
Mm-hmm. So what you're talking about here is like very near and dear to me
Mm,
because it had a lot to do with my research, and my, I my homeland is where the first atomic bomb was made,
mm,
and so to this day, many of our tribal members are employees with the lab that still functions today, and it is also like similarly, people attach it to our identity and
mhm,
have
mhm,
even attempted to associate the
yeah,
nuclear bomb with our culture. And there's such a great commodification of our culture, to the point that not only are we willing to like manufacture and sell our culture, but it's literally has reshaped our identity and how you are considered more or less authentic depending on
mhm,
whether or not you align yourself with the nuclear industrial complex.
mhm, mhm,
And so I just really appreciate the work you've done in that way to really talk about the commodification of culture, the fetishizing of indigeneity,
mhm, mhm,
um, in a way that is sold to primarily the white Western rich consumer, right? Because that's who it's for. And I also come from an artist family.
Mm-hmm.
My family was potters, and the New Mexico is also known for its art and tourism industry. So what underlies the art industry and why it's so popular is this idea that you're getting the purest, most authentic Indian art from like the last real like Indians, and like
Mm-hmm.
similarly like
Yeah,
Pueblo
yeah.
people, the people that I come from,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of ascribe us, they put a status on us as being like more authentic or more like, I don't, it's very bizarre, and it's like arbitrary too, right? And like you said, they're false
Mm-hmm.
narratives. They're false narratives about our identity
Mm-hmm.
and about our culture and about even our history. And unfortunately, we don't have even a fraction of the economic power or
Mm-hmm.
revenue that you all get back from your industries. And so, yeah, I think this is a hugely important one. And
Mm-hmm.
like Nick said, this is going to transcend academic circles. I really hope that tribal leaders everywhere read your study, to make just well informed decisions about how to move forward and about understanding the nuances and how we develop our nations. Um, but yeah, like you said, most importantly, I think what's going to bolster any kind of autonomy for any of us is our relationships with each other, and the recognition we get from each other, not from an occupier.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to add, like, I have a feeling that we're finishing, right? That the diamond mining in my home region, it wasn't a problem till 2022.
Hmm.
It became the problem
When they did the
only,
sanctions.
yes, it became the problem for the West only when, like the conflict, Russia-Ukraine started. But
Mm-hmm.
before that, everyone was completely fine and
Mm-hmm.
happy to buy diamonds, to continue buying diamonds. And again, like since 1950s, because at that time also, the Soviet Union, they didn't have any market for the diamonds because it's a bourgeois luxury item, right? Like why do you need them? So the most of the diamonds since 1950s, they were going to the West.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a very funny story, like very quickly. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
hilarious. Is the diamonds were most of the diamonds they're bought by one company, by De Beers during the
Mm-hmm.
Soviet times. They had these um, agreements, De Beers and the Soviet government. So De Beers was buying all the diamonds that were coming from my home region since
Mm-hmm.
1950s, and they were responsible for marketing and selling the diamonds.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1970s, I don't think maybe I know like all the people they know. There was this marketing strategy, the advertisement of De Beers diamonds, eternal diamonds, or diamonds
Mm-hmm.
of eternity, or maybe like eternity diamonds. The company encouraged to buy for not for engagement, but for wives. Like so, kind of like saying that, oh yeah, the diamonds are forever. Like, and my love for you is forever as these
Yeah.
diamonds. Like so, eternity diamonds. Oh, eternity love or whatever. So,
Yeah.
anyways, and so this was like actually the most popular and the most successful advertisement since they existed. So, and in
Yeah.
1970s, okay, imagine this is the height of the Cold War, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
the West and the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it was so successful that a lot of people they bought, a lot of men, like American men and the European men, they bought uh, rings, eternity
Mm-hmm.
rings, with the Soviet diamonds to give to their European and the American wives. So more
Yeah.
like I can imagine more likely a lot of the like people like who got the rings, like women who got their rings at that time, they actually wearing the Soviet diamonds.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I don't
Man.
remember why I started talking about that. So, anyway,
That's
yeah,
so ironic. Like I think people
it
in the
is very
US
ironic.
would
Yeah.
be so shocked to hear something like that just because of, you know, how propagandized we are.
Yeah. It's a hypocrisy of the capitalism, right? Like hypocrisy of capitalism. So
Hmm.
and so imagine this since 1950s, right? Like and the diamond mining and specifically this diamond mining company, again, it became the problem only in 2022. Before that, the Europeans and the Americans and the Canadian, they're very happy to buy these diamonds.
Hmm.
Um, so, and how I see that as your white supremacist hypocrisy is showing, and it's
Hmm.
not very cute, you know,
Yeah.
because before that, no one cared about what kind of impact the diamond mining production has on indigenous communities in
Hmm.
my home region. No one cared about that. You know, like they were just like buying the diamonds. Tiffany was actually one of the
Hmm.
largest buyers of the Russian diamonds since till 2022. So you know, like, and it begs the question, right? Are you really concerned about diamond production? You know, like, and how it affects local indigenous communities, or you're more concerned about something else? So, and I think this is the very good question to I guess, you know, like to finish. And because, you know, like I'm hoping that people now start thinking about, you know, like all of these different aspects, you know, like and the factors that they come into play in the
Right.
government decisions, you know, like and the how generally, you know, like the neoliberal capitalism works, not only in my home region but also, you know, like in generally globally.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I deeply appreciate everything you shared. I think looking at the hypocrisy in the diamond industry, especially in the context of your people, is so important, right? Where suddenly entities like the IMF are willing to say that it's blood diamonds being
Mm.
mined from your
Yes,
people's
yes,
homeland, that it's conflict
right,
diamonds.
right.
Meanwhile, there are no moves being made
Hmm.
in you know, various countries in Africa where there's actually slavery
Hmm.
being
Hmm.
used to
Yeah.
mine diamonds.
And also, if you look at the companies that operate, for example, in Canada,
Hmm.
I looked it up. There are like two big companies. One of them is Anglo American, and
Hmm.
it belongs to um, it's a British company, but
Mm.
but they occupy like more than 20% of the diamond mining. You know, like in on the Northwestern Territories. It's kind of like insane to me. And the second company is Rio Tinto, and
Oh
I
yeah,
imagine,
they.
yes.
Oh,
So
we know them.
and 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 Rio Tinto is the British Australian company. And I was thinking about it. So I looked up, you know, like the history, the talking about the conflict diamonds and the blood diamonds that they're trying to use the label uh, to use that label to identify uh, diamonds coming from my home region, you know.
Hmm.
But also I want to use, you know, like these are indigenous diamonds, you know, like kind of like use it like in two different ways. So you know, like, and I was looking at the record of human rights abuses and the indigenous rights abuses of Rio Tinto specifically,
Hmm.
and I didn't even, you know, like looked a lot of information on that. I just looked at what they had on Wikipedia, and it made
Hmm.
me very sad. It made me very sad for the indigenous communities in not only in the you know, in Australia because they're big in Australia, right? But also in Latin America because they're completely rogue company. They just don't care about the indigenous rights or the human rights for that matter. And I can't even
Yeah.
start thinking about De Beers and how they operate on the African continent.
Hmm.
So I would say that in comparison, um, and again, I'm saying that as someone who will be the first to critique the diamond mining company that
Hmm.
operates in my home region.
Mm-hmm.
But in comparison to these companies, it quite tame. It's quite tame. So and but the context again are very different, right? Like so we need to consider that as well. Yeah.
Certainly. And I think another key component is just, again, that environmental impact.
Yes, yes.
And which is something that you all you emphasize are still struggling with and
Mhm.
working through. But I think, based on your study and based on what you've shared about your people, there's conscious efforts to employ people, to provide what people need. And in our book, The Red Deal, the Red Deal, we talk about the opportunity to employ people via
Mhm.
cleanup of the environment.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I mean, that certainly seems like a possibility for you all. And it seems like y'all have already established like a form of structure and a governance that truly prioritizes your people. And so I encourage all of our tribal leaders to look to your people, to look to the Sakha Republic, and to take notes, like sincerely.
Like extractivism is extractivism, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it can't be sustainable. And
Mm-hmm.
especially diamond the extraction, it's pretty horrible. It's pretty horrible. It's especially the open pit
Yeah.
strategy, like technique that they use. So, and I'll be the first person to critique it because it's extremely disruptive, like,
Yeah.
and it's disrupts, like the local indigenous life ways, like in many different ways. And again,
Mm-hmm.
this is based on my um even my own family because like I would say like three generations, right? Like we lived through the development of extractivism in my home village. So the experiences of my own family, my own experiences, like, and the experiences of my community, and a lot of the communities now more in the Arctic districts. So no extractivism is good. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is the
Mm-hmm.
way to, I think, like understand that. However, like,
Absolutely.
what is important is to understand the specific contexts, right?
Mm-hmm.
In what context and in what conditions the extractivism happens. And I guess like I agree with that, like, and also to find the point of connections, like, and the point of
Yeah.
connections with the other indigenous communities, like, and the other indigenous experiences in order to have more fundamental critique of
Mm-hmm.
extractivism, and also think about um, how to how to create the praxis, right? Like the
Yeah.
oppositional practice based on that.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Thank you so much. And that just that accountability, because I think all of
Mm.
us want a livable earth. I know that as Indigenous people, all of our life ways, our ceremonial life is directly related to the
Mhm.
land, the
Yes.
animals, the
Yes.
environment, and the ecology.
Mhm.
And when that's destroyed, it literally disrupts our life ways.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think we're all invested. I mean, not, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but as Red Nation, we're invested and committed to that project of building a world in which the earth can live freely and in which we can sustain ourselves without having to depend on extraction and the destruction of our
Mhm.
mother earth. So again, thank you so much for all the work you do. Thank you for this impactful study. I look forward to seeing how it continues to impact the world for the better. And I look forward to staying connected with you, Sardana. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. Thank you so much, Jen, having me because I listened to other episodes with you, and everything was very interesting. So I'm very happy to be here again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And one last thing, where can our followers keep up with your work?
Oh, yes. The study is published on our website, zbeinglab.org. Oh, is it zbeinglab.org? Oh my God, I forgot.
It's okay. We can post a
Okay, we can
link.
put it there. Okay, so it's available. It's available on our website, and it's in PDF. It's not very long. It's not very long, so I'm hoping that people will find it interesting enough to finish it. Um, But I'm not necessarily exist online because I'm very much, I don't want to do that very often. But I do have my academic profile on some of the academic pages, like
Hmm.
platforms, whatever. And I have some articles there that also can be accessed freely. So if you're interested in my other writings and what I think about things, you can find there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to put links when we post this episode so people can follow you. And again, I just deeply appreciate you taking time out of your day to come and talk with me about all of this.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.